Hello and welcome to Crushing Comics. I'm your host Peter, and we are here to talk about and fall in love with my comic book collection, which is collected at this point primarily in collected editions. I'm not as much about buying that floppy life where you get the floppy issues of comic books and you read them so carefully and you slip them into the bags and boards. No, too much. I'd rather just have them in nice, durable books that don't feel quite as precious. And I haven't been making that many videos lately, but it might come as a surprise to you, or perhaps not, that I did keep buying comic books while I was not making videos for you. So I have accumulated a few new oversized hardcovers, and I have one here that I wanted to talk about that I haven't even cracked open yet. So right here I have The Wedding of Cyclops and Phoenix. And the first thing you might say to yourself is, gee, that's not a very exciting name for a comic book with a lot of stabbing of Sabretooth and Wolverine and fighting and I don't know what else is in this. Blood ties, right? Why isn't it called X-Men Blood Ties, right? A wedding is somewhat of a blood tie. But here's the thing. This came out at the end of 2018, and if you recall, originally Fox was planning on releasing a Dark Phoenix movie at the end of 2018, and Marvel likes to take advantage, taking off the cell right now, Marvel likes to take advantage of the cross-promotional opportunities when movies come out. I can show this to you with data. For example, when it comes to Marvel's Silver Age collections, or let's call them collections that have previously been collected as a Marvel Masterworks, Marvel will generally progress the collection line by one omnibus volume every time they have a new movie. That's why we have Iron Man omnibuses, Avengers omnibuses. You know, Avengers omnibus number 4 is coming out for the Avengers movie this year. Spider-Man omnibus number 4 is coming out for the Spider-Man movie this year. That is how we get new omnibuses. And it's no different for X-Men. Marvel will put out more omnibuses in general for X-Men, but they always put out a certain amount of omnibuses generally timed to the release of a major media property, and so that's where this one came from. Unfortunately, it's come with a very bumped corner. I don't really mind that stuff too much, but it's like really kind of bumped and the dust jacket's all crummy, but we don't make returns from New Zealand to the United States. Oh, it's a shame because it's really busted looking on this cover. This is kind of a nice cover concept too. Just like this photo album look. Pretty cool, but as you can see, maybe you can't because the light's reflecting off it, but it got a really sharp bump at some point and it's like kind of a bummer. So here's the thing. This pseudo-omnibus, you'll notice it doesn't actually say omnibus, even though it's as big as one. It continues through the wedding of Cyclops and Phoenix, and has more story after that, but it doesn't actually, it's not primarily about the wedding. It's like they're gonna get married. It's not like the whole book is even really themed about that. As I said, it starts with Blood Ties. So Blood Ties was a brief Avengers and X-Men crossover between Uncanny X-Men, X-Men, Avengers, and West Coast Avengers. And it was directly following Fatal Attraction. So Magneto, had just torn out Wolverine's adamantium, and he had taken Colossus away to be one of the acolytes, and there was definitely a feeling that Magneto was a problem, and so there's this brief Avengers and X-Men crossover. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, it might be the first time X-Men and Avengers directly crossed over with each other, which is pretty cool. I remember buying it at the time. So that's the first just few issues in here. And then there's this interesting subplot that is going on between the issues of Sabretooth. So Sabretooth had come out of this phase of being primarily this Wolverine villain who was mean and hunting lots of Morlocks, and then after the Weapon X stuff came out in Marvel Comics Presents, Sabretooth started getting teased a lot more strongly as having some big tie to Wolverine's history. We hadn't always had this. Like, Sabretooth debuted in the 70s, but this idea of Sabretooth really being tied closely to Wolverine didn't start happening until the late 80s when he first appeared in X-Men and really was solidified during that Larry Hama Wolverine run where he was appearing. And so after that comes the Sabretooth miniseries, and then he appears here. And what happens is he's, and in between there and here is a really good issue of X-Men Unlimited, which is in here. X-Men Unlimited 3, which if I'm not mistaken is the issue where we find out that Sabretooth and Mystique have a very specific past life connection. Let's see if that's the one I'm thinking of. And so basically Sabretooth had been using psychics to like temporarily pacify him and really stop his like ultra super murder rage. And so that turned out to, his psychic gets killed in that Sabretooth miniseries, and so he kind of throws himself upon the threshold of the X-Mansion ultimately and becomes a recurring cast member of the X-Books. Here's that X-Men Unlimited issue I was talking about. And I happen to know a lot about this right now because I just debuted a Sabretooth guide to all of my Patreon supporters that has every single Sabretooth appearance ever, and it summarizes what he did in every single issue. So if you're a Sabretooth fan, if you've always wanted to do a Sabretooth chronological read, that is now available to folks who are even pledging as low as $1 a month to keep all of this media empire afloat. So Sabretooth gets to the X-Mansion, and he's not like, it's not like he's joining the team. They're kind of keeping him captive and trying to rehabilitate him while they're keeping him captive, and it's not really working. And this is happening in the background of all of these issues because Wolverine is newly gone with the adamantium torn out of his skeleton, and Sabretooth is kind of skulking around at the X-Mansion. And all of those plots ultimately run through Phalanx Covenant, where he's kind of a willing accomplice to the X-Men team, and then culminate after that with Sabretooth eventually breaking out. They think that he's dead after this one-shot in the Red Zone, Sabretooth in the Red Zone. Then he joins X-Factor against his will. All of these things happen. It's actually a really long multi-year arc for Sabretooth that's kind of about the question of, can he be rehabilitated if he wants to be? And there are two different questions. One is, can he? And the other is, does he want to be? So a lot of the material in this book is about that, and also material that's setting up Phalanx Covenant. Honestly, it's a really good period, and it kind of bugs me that it was marketed as the Wedding of Cyclops and Phoenix because, you know, I mean, it's got cool wedding stuff like this beautiful fashion portrait of Jean Grey, but it's also got a lot of cool X-Men story stuff, and I just feel like maybe that got shortchanged a little bit by the title that they gave this book. So that's the story on this. You know, this was in paperback, not with this quite large an issue range, but with a significant portion of this issue range. And people kind of slept on it for a while because it was like, again, the wedding. If you don't care about the wedding, why would you buy it? And then it went out of print, and I think people realized not only is it out of print and everybody has FOMO when that happens, but they realized it had all of these key issues of Uncanny X-Men and X-Men that linked between Fatal Attractions and Bloodties, which was not in that original paperback, and Phalanx Covenant on the other side. And then it got to be one of these like really high-priced X-Men paperbacks, which gets ridiculous. So I would say don't sleep on this. If you like that early mid-90s pre-Age of Apocalypse era of X-Men comic books, it's good. If you like the X-Men the Animated Series and you want to see those designs and that cast, this is actually a really good omnibus to get. If you get the Claremont and Lee omnibus, which has that team pictured on the cover, really you only get 11 issues of them, or is it 13 issues? As it happens, yeah, 11. You only really get 11 issues of that Jim Lee outfit design era, and it's only half of the teams that doesn't have the Uncanny X-Men issues from that period. They are in Bishop's Crossing. So that's not going to be as satisfying to you as a fan of the Lee era. If you're a fan of the Lee era and the animated series, one of the two things you should either get Executioner's Song, because it has all of those people in all of those costumes, or you should get this. Now, this does not directly follow Executioner's Song. Executioner's Song stops at Uncanny X-Men 297. So there's a book in between those two, which is the Uncanny X-Men Fatal Attractions oversized hardcover. Then comes this, but there's actually one additional gap that is worth mentioning. So this, there's one issue that is actually collected in the Phalanx Covenant hardcover, which comes after this, but there's an issue from before this that's in that hardcover. Why? Well, I've paged through it pretty recently, and it's so specific to what happens in Phalanx Covenant that it's clearly a prologue for that, even though it happens like 10 issues earlier, and it wouldn't really do you a lot of good to be in this book. Now, I personally am annoyed by this non-sequential collecting of issues and scooping one up from one place and shoving it into some other place, but in this case, I can, I guess, understand why you would have done that. So that's the story about the Wedding of Cyclops and Phoenix, and long story short, that if you like that era, this is probably one of the 3 or 4 books you should be thinking about picking up to enjoy on your bookshelf, whether you read it originally at the time or are going to be new to it now. Plus, they do get married if you're into that kind of thing. There's actually a Marvel Weddings paperback that has all of their famous weddings from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, so if you're a real romantic, maybe pick that up. But anyway, that is X-Men, The Wedding of Cyclops and Phoenix, with a lot of Andy Kubert art in it, who I really, really loved, and a lot of writing from Fabian Nicieza and Scott Lobdell, who were the dream team of X-Men writers at the time. So there it is, and now we're going to have the official shelving, so it can join the collection right there. See, you don't even see that bumped corner while it's on the shelf. So thank you so much for tuning in and listening to me ramble about really one of my favorite periods of X-Men. Keep tuning in for more videos about comic books, X-Men comic books, and otherwise remember that you can support this channel, these videos, and also be able to see guides like that Sabretooth guide by just pledging a single $1 a month towards my Patreon campaign. Thank you so much. My name is Peter, and this has been another episode of Crushing Comics.